So you want to be a body piercer. Excellent. So how do you learn? There are no trade schools, no colleges or universities to teach you what you need to know. Either you find an experienced piercer to teach you, or you teach yourself. This mini course is designed to give you a good introduction and insight to options for gaining the skills and knowledge you will need to move forward in the world of body piercing. Included with your course is the book by Elaine Angel, The Piercing Bible. In addition to that, you will get a binder with handouts and your piercer's log. Additionally, I will be a resource for you. If you have questions during or after you have completed the course, feel free to contact me, text, phone, or email. In just a few days, we step into the studio for hands-on practice, live demonstrations, and experience giving and getting piercings. Now, some of you may go on to apprentice in other studios, and some may come in to apprentice at our studio. Some of you will do none of these and self-teach. We are not here to judge any of those options. In fact, many piercers today have self-taught. We would like for this course to give you a hand up, a better start, so you can become a better piercer. The information in this course is designed to give you a broad overview of the fundamentals of body piercings and to give you the practice activities to help you gain skills. A little bit of the history of piercing. So ancient piercing, like ear piercing and nose piercings, have been particularly widespread and are well represented in historical records and among grave gods. The oldest mummified remains ever discovered had earrings, attesting to the existence of the practice more than 5,000 years ago. Fast forward to modern times, the 1970s. The Gauntlet on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood was the first professional piercing studio in America. He opened the studio in 1978, and it went defunct in about 1998. Now, Jim Ward was the piercer, and he was the founding father of the Gauntlet and of modern piercing. He was a jewelry manufacturer. He started home piercing in 1975 out of his West Hollywood home, and then he opened the Gauntlet in 1978. Now, Doug Malloy is another interesting character. His real name is Richard Simonton. He was a wealthy Hollywood businessman and a piercing enthusiast. He was a promoter. He created fictional histories to promote piercing, came up with all kinds of names that had nothing to do with anything, but they were great stories and got public interest. Fakhar Musafar, who was born in 1930 and passed away in 2018. He's a modern primitive. He is said to have been inspired by ancient mystical spiritual applications of piercings. Now, there is a Fakhar Musafar Foundation in San Francisco, and it is still in operation at the time of making of this video. Fakhar was born as Roland Loomis, and he was well known professionally as Fakhar Musafar. He was an American performance artist considered to be one of the founders of the modern primitive movement, and you can read more on these people up in Wikipedia. Elaine Angel is a piercer, an author of the Piercing Bible, and one of the Gauntlet's first apprentices. I do want to take a moment to talk about the APP, or the Association of Professional Piercers. They are an amazing international educational organization. They promote learning and standards for the piercing industry. Membership levels vary, and all of the training that I provide for you is focused on the APP standards of practice. Many of the handouts you receive from me come from the APP. This is a photograph of Jim Ward and the original Gauntlet piercing studio. This is a photo of Fakar in all of his glory. Cutting edge for his day and still today. And this is Elaine Angel and the two versions of her book, the original Piercing Bible and the revised and expanded Piercing Bible. Now, laws vary from area to area, state to state, city to city, county to county. There are no standards across the United States, and it is your responsibility to research the laws and regulations where you will practice your art of piercing. OSHA requires certain workplace safety procedures and protocols for needle stick, bloodborne pathogens. OSHA's job is to mitigate risk to workers. Additionally, a local health authority may have restrictions, requirements, and regulations. All shops are required to have a written procedure manual or a practice of standards. When starting out as a body piercer, everybody wants some kind of certification to show their clients that they have achieved something. The first certification you need to get is your bloodborne pathogens and universal precautions and CPR certifications. It's not very expensive and relatively easy using online training sources. You will receive a certificate of completion for this workshop provided you complete 70% of the workshop and show proficient skills. How do you pick a shop to apprentice with? If you're looking for a good shop to apprentice with, and unfortunately the gauntlet is no longer an option, you can find good piercers and good shops to apprentice with, but you need to start by asking good questions. How long have they been in business? Who will you be learning from? Are they associated with the APP? Do they even know what the APP is? Is the business in a commercial location? Not piercing out of a home, that doesn't count. And how many piercings do they do in a day or a week or a year? Learning from someone who has done hundreds of piercings is far more valuable than someone who occasionally does piercings. And then, how do you get a shop to take you on? Usually the biggest challenge you face is to get a shop to take you on. It can be difficult to find someone who will apprentice you, and you must impress them. The fact is, it's not enough to say you want to be a piercer. Everybody wants to be a piercer. You must impress them enough for them to take the time and the energy it requires to gain you the skills and information you need. It's not enough to offer to take out the trash or clean floors. Competition for the few spots in the world of piercing is tough. You must demonstrate you're worth their investment of time and energy. You will have a much better chance of gaining a spot in a shop by demonstrating that you have a mastery of the basic skills and information, and you can be an asset to them. The reading material that I provide for you will be beneficial. Read it, understand it, work on your dexterity, practice skills holding tools and needles, understand the names of the most common piercings and proper placement. You must know the proper names of the tools and how and when to use them. Know aftercare and healing. Know the history of piercing and be prepared to talk about it. Some shops may allow you in as counter help or cleanup or some other menial job. Some will offer no pay, expressing that your compensation is the fact that they are teaching you. Some may offer you a portion of the fees you generate. Splits are often the case. Occasionally you may find a shop that will pay you an hourly rate. Every shop is going to be different. I understand there are shops who will pay you for your time on one hand and charge you for the learning on the other, effectively washing out the cost. Just be aware when you go in what it is that you're agreeing to. Or maybe you will start your own body piercing business or diversify your current business. If you're currently doing permanent makeup or tattooing or aesthetics, adding piercing is a compatible business. There are 3 areas of skill that you need to develop. Mental discipline. This includes a calm bedside manner, being comfortable and making your client comfortable when being in a close physical proximity, selling your services and managing your client's expectations. There are physical skills required to be a competent piercer. You must have excellent hand dexterity and good vision to do the physical functions. This includes the cleaning, marking, and placement of the piercing, the clamping of the skin or the pressure of a receiving tube, the angle of the piercing, moving the needle through the tissue, securing the needle, and inserting the jewelry. Professional knowledge and practices includes proper aseptic techniques, sterilization, and avoiding any cross-contamination. You must have a good understanding of body anatomy and of wound healing and general health. The most difficult part to learn is the physical hands-on. This can be overcome with practice. You will be working on many different practice mediums in the studio. There is a complete take-home kit for you to practice on and to improve your skills with. The specific knowledge you need to be a body piercer, as with any profession, you need to master. That information includes, but is not limited to, sterilization from beginning to end, how to deal with people, gain their trust, and put them at ease. Then you can discuss with your client when a particular piercing is or is not a good choice for that individual. You need to know the healing times and appropriate aftercare for each piercing. You need to know which piercing tools and techniques for each piercing. How to prepare and mark all of the piercing you are qualified to perform. The best jewelry designs and proper materials of each. The names and locations of traditional piercings. Earn a reputation as a safe piercer by following these guidelines. Safety is the single most important requirement of any piercer. That means never put your client or yourself at risk in any way. Your reputation as a safe piercer will be an extremely valuable asset. Follow these guidelines. Sterilization and hygiene must be strictly observed. Never do a piercing that might endanger the client or insert a piece of jewelry that is not appropriate, regardless of what the client may desire. Never use an ear-piercing gun to pierce anything, period. All of the items in the next few slides should be a review, as this would all have been covered in your bloodborne pathogens training, and I cannot stress to you enough about your responsibility to ensure there is no cross-contamination within your workspace. You must break the chain of infection in every step of piercing. Our most important job as piercers is to avoid transmitting any harmful organism from one person to another. Contamination happens from innocent activity. A baggy shirt or shirt sleeve lightly brushing over a client coming into contact with body fluid. A piercer touching a drawer or instrument with a contaminated glove. These are all preventable by being aware. Proper hand hygiene is the first defense against cross-contamination. Knowing when and how to change gloves in the piercing and cleaning room is the next defense in preventing cross-contamination. You are expected to know hand wash protocol and follow it always. Never enter a room without first washing your hands and or using hand sanitizer. You must wash your hands with soap and water anytime the hands are visibly soiled. You may use hand sanitizer if there is no visible soil. Gloves are one of the most used items in any piercing practice. They should fit well, slightly tight, so you are able to pick up tiny pieces of jewelry and thread it to its end. You will likely use 5 pairs of gloves in a piercing. Always wash your hands prior to donning your gloves and immediately after removing your gloves. Keep your fingernails short, trimmed, and smooth, and remove jewelry and watches to prevent damage. This is a CDC guideline. Use only disposable gloves. Store gloves properly, and be mindful of latex allergies or use nitrile only. Latex gloves are problematic and many people have allergies to them. We only use nitrile gloves in our practice. Pre-planning your piercing procedure and having your piercing tray properly set up will save you glove use during the piercing and ultimately save you money from the most efficient use of the gloves and not wasting. When should gloves be worn? For all cleaning and setup activities, during sweeping, mopping, and trash removal, during all disinfection or sterilization procedures, when working in sterilization or processing areas or dealing with contaminated tools or containers, when transporting contaminated implements to the clean room, when transporting sterilized implements from the autoclave to the designated storage areas, and during client contact. Never touch a client with an ungloved hand. How gloves should be used. Generally, gloves should be used as follows. After washing your hands or using hand sanitizer, use a clean pair of gloves to set up your piercing tray. Some studios will require a glove change to open autoclave packages. This is especially true if you are purchasing pre-sterilized items, because the outside of the package is not sterile. Change your gloves to do the cleaning and prep and marking of the piercing areas on the skin. Change gloves to perform the piercing. Change gloves to clean the piercing tray and for your post-procedure cleanup. Change gloves to clean any tools to be replaced on your piercing workstation. So you can see it's a minimum of 5 pair of gloves for one piercing. When should gloves be changed? Anytime you unexpectedly contaminate your gloves during setup or piercing, change your gloves immediately. If the glove integrity is compromised, or if a glove becomes weakened or contaminated, if a weak spot, a pinhole, or tear is detected or suspected, when moving from a more contaminated area to a less contaminated area, and many studios will have written procedures for glove changes. From sterile to clean to contaminated. All piercing environments and tools pass through stages from sterile to clean to contaminated. In our studio, we use traffic light colors. Any area that is green is sterile. This includes the autoclave packages in the storage areas, sharps, jewelry, tools, and prep packs, and placing items in this area or taking them out requires fresh gloves. Any area that is yellow is not sterile and not contaminated. These are things like counters, work surfaces, outside the autoclave, outside of the sterilized packages. Any area that is red is contaminated. Used sharps and used instruments, gloves after client contact, previously worn jewelry, ultrasonic, dirty side of the tool processing room. Any contact in red areas requires gloves, and gloves are to be removed and properly disposed of when you leave those red zone areas. There are signs all over our studio that indicate red areas and green areas, so you do not have to guess. and anything that doesn't have a sign on it is a yellow area. The clean room. Contamination in the clean room or area where you process your dirty tools raises contamination issues. Avoiding cross-contamination in your processing area is very important. If proper procedures are not followed, you will contaminate the tools, needles, and jewelry you just sterilized. When this happens, the contamination is transferred into the piercing room. Pay attention to the zones. Keep your clean room clean. And you'll notice on this slide right here, there's a little bit of, you can see a little bit of the red zone signage. And way over here on this side, that's a green zone signage. So when you are in the studio, you will notice those areas, and please pay attention and act accordingly. Cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization are all parts of the same process, but they differ significantly in the number and types of microorganisms that are killed. Understanding the difference helps the piercer to make contaminated items safe for reuse in the studio. Each of these is a separate step. Cleaning is the physical act of removing debris and reduces many of the microorganisms present on the object. This may be done with an ultrasonic cleaner. The ultrasonic uses ultrasound energy and produces tiny bubbles that implode with high pressure and result in an extremely thorough cleaning of the surfaces. Ultrasonics should always be covered when in use. This is your ultrasonic. Disinfection is the process that kills some, but not all disease-causing microorganisms and slows regrowth. Many disinfection solutions come in spray bottles or wipes. These are never to be used with ungloved hands. Sterilization is the process that kills all microbial life. You must sterilize all tools and jewelry to be used on your client. This is an autoclave, and that is how we sterilize our equipment and supplies. Reusable equipment. Whenever you have used something and it becomes contaminated and it is a piece of equipment or tool that will be reused, you must follow these steps. Wipe off to remove all gross debris. Debris on instruments should not be allowed to dry before processing because blood and other debris become more difficult to remove when dry. Soak in an enzymatic cleaning solution. Rinsed. Manually scrub to remove all resistant debris. Repeat steps 2 and 3 if needed. Clean in an ultrasonic. Rinse. Dried. You can use corrosion-inhibiting surgical instrument lubricant at this step. Packaged and labeled with date and batch number if required, and sterilized in the autoclave and allowed to fully dry before removing. Disposable supplies. Help reduce the risk of cross-contamination. Disposables include marking implements, piercing needles, corks, synthetic stoppers, elastic bands, swabs, and gauze. Many studios will pre-pack and sterilize prep packs like the one in the upper right photo. When setting up for a piercing or jewelry insertion after washing hands and donning your glove, the piercer should first select and assemble all the materials and tools that might be needed for the procedure. To avoid the cross-contamination, it is unacceptable to reach into storage drawers or containers with gloves that have touched a client. If additional supplies are needed after touching a client, the piercer must don a new pair of gloves before getting any additional items in the drawers or containers. When setting up for a piercing or jewelry insertion, after washing your hands, donning your gloves, the piercer should first assemble and select all the materials and tools that might be needed for the procedure. To avoid cross-contamination, keep in mind what you need. First, you're going to clean, then you'll mark, then you'll pierce. What do you need for each step? Each piercing will require a slightly different setup. So let's talk about those tools and supplies. Tools, 4 steps, hemostats, receiving tubes, needles, threaders, insertion pins, gauze, skin prep, cotton swab, marking supplies, bacitracin or glide, and your jewelry. This is an example of a tray setup being done. Notice how she's got the sterile package. Her hands are gloved. Setting up the tray, that's a cap that would you put some hydrogen peroxide into. That hydrogen peroxide is used for removing marks after you've marked your placement for your jewelry on the skin. Gathering the rest of the supplies. Again, gloved hands, opening up drawers that have packaged items that have already been sterilized. She's choosing her needles right now. Choosing her hemostat. Hemostats are often used for holding jewelry or small items that your fingers are just too large to hold. Selecting her jewelry. The point here is that gloved hands, while you're getting your tray set up and ready to go, and assembling all of the supplies that you might need before you start your piercing. Next, let's talk about your most important tool. It is the piercing needle. When you're doing a piercing, you must be able to control and observe the needle at all times. The most secure way to do that is to have the bevel up. You have more control, power, and better vision of where the needle is in the skin. A good needle is important to a comfortable piercing. Using the best needles and performing a quick and smooth piercing action will ensure the most comfort for your client. We get our needles from Industrial Strength Needles. They have a ton of good information on their site. Beveled needles that are correctly made cut through the skin without removing any skin and leave a crescent shape, making for easy jewelry insertion and facilitating a quick healing. A needle that is incorrectly made will tear through the skin. This is a major reason not to pierce with a piercing gun. With a piercing gun, they're using a sharpened piece of jewelry and thrusting it through the skin, causing unnecessary damage and extending the healing time. Let's take a look at the Industrial Strength website. You can shop for accessories of all kinds of disposables, aftercare products, ointment sharps, all of it, all of your tools. They have a very good selection of professional piercing items for our industry, and just a super good resource for you. So I encourage you to go to Industrial Strength and check out their information. They've got great customer service. But anyway, you can go in there and you can check and see, check them out yourself. Needles and Piercing Essentials. Corks as well. These are the needles that I like to use. This is their coated needles. They are very, very, very good quality, all different sizes. I generally will use a 2-inch or a 3-inch. The 1.5 are very, very short and difficult to hold on to, but that becomes a personal preference, and every piercer is going to find the right fit for them. Anyway, I encourage you to check out Industrial Strength Needles. They are a very, very good company. All right, let's look at how to hold the needle. Generally, I use 2 different holds when piercing. Most often, I use a side hold. It gives better control and accuracy. The needle may be held at the back of the shaft, or you may adjust your hold closer to the tip. That's known as choking up. Choking up on the needle is useful when you need to keep the needle from exiting too far from the piercing. The needle is placed with the thumb on one side and the index and middle finger on the other. The other hold is the back hold, when you need more power going through tough or dense skin and larger flaps of skin. The needle is held at the back with the index finger resting at the end of the shaft. This provides more force, and the thumb and middle finger on either side of the needle. In the studio, you will be practicing on oranges and with a practice board with these different holds. Oranges create a similar sensation as real skin. You'll feel a resistance, and the end of the orange is where the peel is denser, and that resembles cartilage. So it's a very good tool for practice, and then if you're hungry later, you can have a snack. Practice using an orange over and over again. Your piercing movement should be firm and smooth. You will feel the pressure it takes to penetrate the skin. Forceps come in a variety of shapes and sizes and are used to align and secure tissue. The intent of increasing the accuracy and speed of the piercing. Forceps should only gently compress the piercing site while causing the client minimal discomfort and no additional tissue damage. When properly used, they can enhance safety for the piercer by allowing the operator's fingers to stay well away from the sharp tip of the needle. Some forceps are designed specifically for body piercings, such as septum forceps or tragus forceps. Others are available to be modified to suit different piercers' preference, for instance, with a slotted, smooth, or serrated head. Proper hold of the forceps is with the cork held at the back with the thumb and index finger. The 3 remaining fingers hold the body of the forceps with the angle of the forceps in line with the wrist and the forearm. A firm hold is required. Press the forceps firmly against the inside of your palm and flat against the end of the cork. This will feel awkward at first because it's difficult to curve the wrist to keep the straight up and down and not twisting the clamp. This hold is often used for navels, nipples, eyebrows, lips, labia, and clitoral or hood piercings. Practice this hold often until it feels natural. This is a forceps being used with a free hand without the cork, and then the cork being attached for safety before inserting the jewelry. Jewelry follows through, a nice smooth application. The bar end is attached, and that completes the piercing. Sponge forceps are used for tongue piercings. Notice the sponge clamp have a large opening. It secures a lot more tissue than the other forceps. They can also be used for the nape or the back of the neck piercing and can be helpful in a variety of surface piercings when you need a lot of tissue supported for the piercings. The sponge forceps can also be used to pierce the ampling and apodivia. The German forceps are special because the gripping teeth are relatively smooth, which avoids discomfort when clamping sensitive tissue and delicate tissue like female nipple and genitalia, both male and female. The small Penningtons have a small narrow head with sharp gripping teeth. The small narrow head is designed for piercing navels. The sharp gripping teeth help secure the tissue on tight skin found in navel piercings. Small Penningtons are also used to secure the tragus for piercings. Large head Penningtons are forceps used for other piercings where you need more grip to secure the tissue during the Hemostats are a clamping tool for a variety of situations where you can't use your fingers. Anytime you need to secure jewelry for an insertion or removal, use hemostats. It'll make it much easier. Hemostats also have locking teeth on the handle. Now that comes in handy when you're inserting jewelry into tight places like the ear, tragus, or lip. You can lock the hemostat onto the jewelry to free your hand to help insert or remove jewelry without worrying about the grip on the hemostat. Needle receiving tubes, or NRTs. They are used to support and protect the tissue during piercing procedures. They are often used for nostril, septum, Prince Albert, vertical clitoral hood, and some ear cartilage piercings. NRTs come in various lengths, sizes, and modifications. They are hollow, usually stainless steel tubes with smooth openings and may have a flared or angled end. Some piercers prefer to use shatter-resistant autoclavable glass, which allow for needle visibility during the procedure. There are single needle disposable metal, glass, or hard plastic tubes available as well. Needle receiving tubes are generally 3 to 6 inches long and come in all gauges. I find the 6 and 4 gauges are the most useful. They are made with a 90-degree angle on one end and a 45-degree angle on the opposite end, and you can pierce into either end depending on the placement that you are working at. Pliers. Optimally, pliers should be made of stainless steel to withstand repeated sterilization. An exception is a brass jaw plier, which have the advantage of being unlikely to scratch the surface of jewelry due to their softer brass-lined surfaces. These particular pliers are great when working with gold because gold is a very soft metal and can scratch. Pliers may be nickel or chrome plated to resist rusting, but will eventually break down and become unusable and will need to be replaced. Ring opening or expanding pliers, which is this one, they're used to remove and insert captive beads and also to widen the gap on captive rings for insertion and removal. They may also be used to spread the gap on a circular barbell and septum retainers. Ring closing pliers are used to narrow the gap on captive rings and to set the proper tension for holding a bead. And the bending pliers are used for bending nostril screws, fishtail, labrays, and needles. These are usually jeweler's pliers, which are available with a number of different head shapes. A commonly used style is called the double round plier. Connecting snips, also known as transfer pins. Stylist or snips or transfer pins are smooth pieces of wire used to stabilize the jewelry transferred during an initial piercing when using internally threaded or threadless jewelry. Even experienced piercers find the wire connection between the jewelry and the needle helpful in maintaining alignment. When they are nicely finished and made of titanium or niobium wire and anodized in contrasting colors, those connecting snips are easily distinguished on the piercing tray. Calipers. These instruments are used for measuring jewelry gauge and diameter or the distance between markings for piercing placement. They are available in metric millimeters and imperial inch gauge systems with decimal and fraction calibrations. Some offer both systems of measurement. Though calipers are made of plastic and metal, few styles can withstand sterilization. Generally, the fancy and more accurate models cannot be sterilized, so great care must be taken not to contaminate them. Calipers for measuring will assure that your measurements are accurate. You will learn how to use calipers when we cover marking a piercing. The top jaw is where inside to inside dimensions for body jewelry is determined. The bottom jaw measures the outside dimensions of jewelry and the depth of measuring marks. This is a caliper most conveniently used in body piercing. It is a dial caliper measuring in inches in 1/64 of an inch. Inside, outside, and depth measurements are easy to obtain with this type of caliper. It is built with a fiberglass reinforced nylon, so it can be wiped and cleaned with like a Calvi wipe. This means it can be cleaned so you can use it. The dial used in body piercing is the inner dial that is divided into 1/64 of an inch. Note that you will see the most frequently used fractions on the dial that are common to body piercing. That is your 1/16, 1/8, 3/16, 1/4, 5/16, 3/8, 7/16, 1/2, and so on. Also notice the bold tick marks on the inner dial. Those are your 16th inches. These are incremental measurements used in body piercing. The bold tick marks point out the measurements between the standard fractions. For instance, the bold tick mark between 3/8 and 1/2 is 7/16. A very common length used for navel piercing, curved barbels. The key to this is the calipers only touch disinfected, cleaned body tissue, skin. The skin is cleaned with a disinfecting towelettes or solution, and then you use a clean caliper to measure the skin. Then you can wipe down and disinfect your caliper after you've touched skin. Do not ever let your calipers get contaminated with blood or other contaminated matter. If you do, stop using the contaminated calipers for body piercing and replace them. The calipers are less than $25, so it's not prohibitive to replace them if you contaminate them. The gauge wheel is a tool that can be used to measure the thickness of body jewelry. Most American body jewelry manufacturers use this standardized measurement for thickness of the jewelry with the Brown and Sharpe American Standard Wire Gauge System. In other industries, this system has been historically used for measuring non-ferrous metals. There are some variances between wholesale companies, so it's always wise to double-check jewelry thickness with the gauge wheel so that the needle before use. Outside the U.S., manufacturers use the metric system for measuring thickness in millimeters, so you just need to be aware of what system they're using and what size your gauge wheel is. Insertion tapers. Now, these taper tools come in a variety of materials and styles. They are used to help the insertion of jewelry into new and existing piercings and to stretch a piercing into a larger size. A taper is smaller on one end and the size of the jewelry for insertion on the other end. Always lubricate the taper with some type of lubricant when using and inserting jewelry into an existing piercing. There are 3 types of taper. One is a dimple taper. That means that the end of the taper used for insertion is concaved or dimpled. That helps assist in inserting a captive bead ring, for instance, and externally threaded body jewelry. The other type of taper is a pin taper. That means the end of the taper fits the jewelry gauge that you are inserting. It has a small pin protruding from the end. The pin fits into the internally threaded jewelry to securely hold the jewelry on the pin during insertion. Then the final type of taper is the threaded taper. It's for inserting jewelry that needs to be pulled through a piercing, like surface bars or other internally threaded jewelry. The threaded pin threads into the jewelry so that it in essence becomes one piece as it goes through the skin. The taper is then removed and the jewelry head is placed on the jewelry. The piercing tray, they're common and used in many applications, and especially in piercing studios where you need to keep a sterile setup off of your working bar or your aseptic field. A sterilized tray setup or a sterilized tray liner should be used as the base for all procedures rather than a countertop or other surface. Trays can be made of autoclavable plastic or stainless steel and covered with an FDA cleared impenetrable tray liner. A mechanical ear piercing device or piercing gun is an instrument designed to perforate the skin for the purpose of inserting jewelry. While piercing guns may seem to be a quick and easy, convenient way of creating holes, they can have major drawbacks in terms of tissue damage, inappropriate jewelry design, and sterility. Piercing guns can cause significant tissue damage and cross-contamination. This is a little video that I found of a piercing gun. Note the lack of gloves. Nothing is sterile in this application. These piercing guns were originally designed to put clothing tags on clothing. They were never initially intended for the use of piercing. However, they are used widely throughout the United States and internationally. Educate your clients to the dangers of using a piercing gun and never use a piercing gun. All right, let's talk about your bedside manner. Developing a strong relationship with your client. A strong relationship makes a more positive piercing experience. Everything evolves from the relationship between the body piercer and the client. The client's warm and fuzzy experience depends on the piercer's ability to make the client feel comfortable. The piercer must create an atmosphere of professionalism. If the client understands and acknowledges the professionalism, then a relationship begins and both people have a good chance of developing a long-term business relationship. As a body piercer, we must develop a feeling of comfort and confidence with the client. In many cases, this must be done in 30 seconds or less. That's the time it takes a potential client to mentally process your attitude, appearance, and professionalism. That evaluation happens instantly and must be positive before the client consciously approves of doing business with you, ultimately trusting you enough to allow you to stick a needle in them. Success for a body piercer is determined by the lasting relationships between the piercer and the client. To operate a successful body piercing business, you must retain between 60 to 80% repeat and referral business. That means developing positive relationships with your clients. It's a must to maintain that long-term body piercing business. The purpose of skin preparation. Before a piercing is ever started, you must clean the surface of the area to be pierced. It needs to be as free as possible from oil, perspiration, dirt, and transient flora. Skin prep using a suitable skin prep product can be either a surgical scrub, alcohol prep wipes. Begin at the center of the site to be pierced, while applying enough pressure to create friction. Scrub in a circular motion, widening gradually outward. If necessary, sterile gauze can be used to dry the area, again using a circular motion, moving from the center outward. This minimizes the chance of pulling contaminants from unclean skin back into the area already cleaned. For oral prep, the client should be given a small amount of the rinse in a disposable cup. He or she should swish thoroughly the liquid for 30 to 60 seconds, or according to the manufacturer's instructions, the client should be advised not to touch the lips or mouth or potential piercing surfaces after the skin has been cleaned. You see, the client was careful not to touch the area that was just cleaned. That's a little surgical scrub on a 2x2. Call that a sponge. That's it. Drying off the surface of the piercing is very important, because when you go to make your marks on the skin, if it is moist, those marks will not show up. Clean and dry. All right, marking a piercing. 2 items are required to mark a piercing. One is a device to mark with, and the other is the caliper to measure between the marks. Options for marking include a Sharpie marker, a surgical marker, or Genesian violet with a sterile autoclaved toothpick. I generally use a Sharpie unless I'm marking for a tongue or a genital piercing, in which case I will use a disposable surgical pin. Sharpie marks are easily removed with hydrogen peroxide and a cotton-tipped swab. When using a Sharpie, you must clean the skin with a surgical scrub or alcohol pad prior to marking. Only use a Sharpie on unbroken skin. In the event you use the pin on broken skin, you must discard it immediately. Always wipe the barrel of the Sharpie with a Calvi wipe prior to use and after use. The pin is not left on the procedure tray. In the event the pin is left on a contaminated tray or touched with contaminated gloves or touches broken skin, it must be discarded immediately. When marking dots to pierce, keep in mind the size of the needle and jewelry you are using. They should be the same size as the size of the mark you are making. The most common sizes are 20, 18, 16, and 14. And marks are removed after piercing. It's good practice to make marks on a blank piece of paper using those most common sizes. You can see if I were doing practice, this 20 gauge is a 0.8 millimeter. It's a very small dot. That's how big the jewelry gauge will be. So that's as big as you want your dot to be. Here's an example of an 18 gauge, which is 1 millimeter, a 16 gauge, which is 1.2 millimeter, a 14 gauge, which is 1.6, and a 12 gauge. Careful measuring and marking. See the tiny dot? It's going to be a very small, that's probably a 20 gauge or an 18 gauge piece of jewelry that's going to go into that spot, and carefully measuring to make sure it's where the client wanted that piercing to be. All right, the piercing. When you know what to do, things like keeping your forceps straight, safely holding onto your cork, you will be able to concentrate on other functions of the piercing, such as being aware of what your client is experiencing, correct angle of the needle going into the skin, tempo of your piercing, remember, smooth and steady. There are many separate tasks you must be mentally aware of during the piercing. So during the piercing, you've got to do the following things. Grip your needle properly. Hold it with the bevel up and towards you. Maintain a perpendicular position of the needle to the forceps. Avoid seating the needle too hard into the flesh as you line it up. When we say seating the needle, that means pushing it into the skin too much before you're actually ready to do the piercing. Safely hold the cork. You need to avoid distorting the tissue during the clamping and piercing as you maintain your grip on the forceps. Maintain a proper stance so you can see and perform the piercing. You must sense the demeanor of your client and everybody else in the piercing room. Give your client calm instructions of what you expect them to do. And now it's time to perform the piercing and insert the jewelry. Body's piercing is more than just poking holes and inserting jewelry. Jewelry must be placed so it rests comfortably with no resistance. Proper placement and appropriate gauge, diameter, and length is important to a successful piercing. When body jewelry does not fit correctly, the body starts reacting and communicating with you immediately. It communicates by becoming red, swollen, festered, producing liquid discharge. If the problem is not corrected, the jewelry can migrate out of the body, leaving a scar behind. In addition to that, high traffic areas of the body, such as navels, they need special consideration when you're selecting jewelry. High traffic areas get a lot of movement from the jewelry, and thicker jewelry is necessary to reduce irritation. Play areas, such as nipples and genitalia, also require thicker jewelry to avoid severe discomfort from the play. Discuss with your client the concept of how their body must adjust to and coexist with the jewelry you insert into the piercing. If they understand that the body is conforming to the jewelry, they will understand that the jewelry you select is important and it must be of a certain size and gauge. To that end, do not let other piercers intimidate you. Just because they put big or unattractive jewelry into their clients, don't let that persuade you to do the same. They are not doing their clients a good job by putting big gaudy jewelry into their piercings. This is also a reason why a good body piercer will not let customers bring body jewelry in off the street to be pierced with. Jewelry selection and placement is determined and creates the final success of the best piercings. We have what we call a piercing speech. Each client should receive instructions before they are pierced. The script should go something like this. All I'm going to do is clamp your whatever the body part is. Once I get it lined up, I will tell you I'm ready. Then I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth, and I will pierce on the exhale. Once you are lined up and ready to go, give these instructions in a reassuring voice with a big smile on your face. That will go a long way to comfort your piercing client. When you practice on the practice board or on your oranges, Get in the habit of giving these instructions before you pierce through the practice board or material. Once you have the script down, you can practice with the command, breathe in and exhale as you pierce on the word exhale. This will get you into a piercing rhythm and make the piercing more comfortable for your client. You should be completely lined up and ready to go on your command. However, if something slips and you're not ready to pierce, don't. If that occurs, take a deep breath, step away, and start over again. The piercing speech I want you to practice is, I'm going to gently clamp your skin, or I will place this receiving tube behind the area to be pierced. Once I get that lined up, I'll tell you I'm ready. I want you to take a large breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. I will pierce on the exhale, and it will take me just a minute more to load your jewelry. Okay? Healing and aftercare. The time necessary to heal a body piercing for the purposes of this discussion is defined. The definition of healing is the chance of infection becomes non-existent. Okay, that means the skin is completely healed and bacteria can no longer get into the body through that opening. Now, this definition has nothing to do with redness or soreness around the piercing. Those issues should be long gone before the piercing is actually healed. Signs of a healed piercing are the lack of discharge or anything seeping from this piercing, if you don't have that crustiness on the body jewelry. And also resistance from moving unlubricated jewelry through the piercing. If you move unlubricated jewelry through the piercing and it grabs the skin inside the piercing, that's a very good indication the piercing is not healed. Now, the list of healing times is highly variable depending on various circumstances. The type of aftercare used, how well the client follows the suggested aftercare, how much irritation does the piercing receive. These are all variables that will either increase or decrease the time for a particular piercing to heal. Now, H2 Ocean is a really great product. It's easy to apply. It's a spray can. You can sell it in your practice and use that as a revenue generating source. It's effective as a body piercing aftercare for all piercings. Also, emu oil is another great aftercare product. Now, even despite the fact that it's oil, emu oil has been clinically proven to be non-pore clogging substance, and it penetrates the skin layers very quickly, leaving no greasy residue. In addition, there have been no known allergic reactions to emu oil in the studies. So, general guidelines for healing times. There is a full list in your handouts in the APP procedure manual on page 27. We often think about healing times as 6 to 8 weeks, 3 to 4 months, and 6 to 9 months. Earlobe, septum, tongue, and some of the below-the-belt piercings are 6 to 8 weeks. Male nipple, nostril, bridge, and lip, as well as some of the below-the-belt piercings, are 3 to 4 months. Ear cartilage, navel, female nipple, surface, those are 6 to 9 months. With better aftercare, clients will likely experience shorter healing times. Clients who are better informed on how to take care of their piercings do better. Additionally, healthier people heal faster than unhealthy individuals. Understanding the concept between internally threaded jewelry and externally threaded body jewelry is very important. Now, this picture illustrates the difference between the two types of jewelry visually. Externally threaded jewelry can snag and pull the skin with the rough edges. Internally threaded jewelry may be either inserted into a taper or used with a snip on the end of the needle, and it has a smooth surface. As a piercer, you have far more options of piercing and inserting jewelry into tight spots using the internally threaded jewelry. You can see that it doesn't have the ridges going through the body, so it's a smooth application. Many piercers find it highly advantageous to pierce in one direction and in another direction. Using internally threaded jewelry and pin tapers, you can easily do that, and we'll go over this more in your practice and hands-on days. Using internally threaded jewelry and pin tapers are important ways to lessen the discomfort on your clients when performing piercings in very tight spaces. Internally threaded jewelry is more expensive than externally threaded jewelry, and now that our threadless jewelry was made popular by the Neo Metal Company, they offer some of the finest quality jewelry available. There are many manufacturers now that are producing threadless jewelry, and the jewelry is held in place by creating tension with a bend on the internal end, and the bigger the bend, the tighter the tension. Let's look at selecting size and gauge. The length of the jewelry is measured from the inside edge of the ball. Note the A to A in the diagram. The diameter is the inside width of a circle in the B diagram. The gauge is the thickness of the jewelry, usually the thickness of the wire the jewelry is made from, but it may also be the diameter of a plug or an eyelet. You will primarily work with jewelry from 18 to 00 gauge, with 14, 16, 18, and 20 being the most common. The smaller the gauge number, the thicker the jewelry is. Conversely, the higher the number, the thinner the jewelry is. So that 20 gauge jewelry is extremely thin. That 14 gauge jewelry is quite a bit thicker. And the ball size is usually indicated in millimeters, aka mm. So in your notebook you have a gauge chart as well as the APP Jewelry Guide for reference. The more you work with body jewelry, the easier it becomes. Use your charts until you are fluent in understanding the gauges. Generally speaking, working with gauges over 10 are typically used when stretching. These are also considered advanced piercings if you're actually going to pierce something that is a 10 gauge. Body jewelry is measured in a diameter for circular jewelry or length for straight or curved jewelry. Now let's talk about the rings. There are many styles of rings today. Captive bead rings are also known as CBRs. Fixed bead rings are known as FBR, continuous rings and segment rings, and hinged rings. A captive bead ring has a dimpled bead that is held by tension between the ends of the ring. If the tension is too loose, the ball can fall out. If the tension is too tight, it can be difficult to remove. That is why we have special tools that can help us with the captive bead rings. Now, a fixed bead ring has the bead permanently attached to the end. A continuous ring has no bead, and a segment ring has a piece that fits similarly to the captive bead ring, and hinges have removable hinged pieces. A ring is measured inside to inside. Now, the rings can be used for all piercings. However, for some piercings, a straight barbell is more appropriate choice. Piercings like a tongue and a frenum would be better served as a straight barbell. Many professional piercers feel a ring in a fresh piercing causes too much stress and may cause prolonged healing or damage to the tissue. We'll look more at that in the hands-on training. But regardless of the gauge, a ring is always measured inside to inside for proper measurement of the jewelry. Rings are made in all gauges from small to large. A circular barbell, or a CBB, also known as a horseshoe or a HS. It's circular like a ring, but it has threaded bead closures. The correct way to measure it is the same as with a ring, inside to inside. The CBB is also made of all gauges and suitable for most piercings that the curved bead ring or rings can be used for. It can be particularly nice for septum piercings if the client wants to be able to tuck the piercing away. Straight barbells. This is a straight barbell. The closures on each end of the barbell are the threaded beads. Straight barbells are made in all gauges from small to large. The straight barbell is measured inside bead to inside bead with the beads completely threaded on. A straight barbell is primarily used for tongue, frenum, nipple, and some various cartilage piercings. Labrette. The labrette is made of the smaller gauges, mostly 18 to 10 gauge sizes, and it's a great jewelry selection for lips, Monroes, snake bites, angel bites, Medusa, and some very long labrettes are made and good for cheeks. Many labrettes are also popular when used with ear cartilage piercings, and they are available in threaded and threadless styles. And the threadless style is much easier to use than a threaded. We also have our curved barbell, or CBB. They're popularly used for navel piercings and brow piercings. They decrease the amount of irritation on the navel because of the bending and sitting. A curved barbell is measured inside bead to inside bead with the beads completely threaded down on each end of the bar, just like on a straight barbell. A curved barbell is made in all different gauges from small to super large, and also in threaded and threadless styles. Jewelry standards for initial piercings. This is a very big topic. Stainless steel, low carbon stainless steel such as 316L and 316 LVM are used in body jewelry because they're proven biocompatibility. Now, studios must have their mill certificates from the jewelry manufacturers showing that the steel being used is compliant. Stainless steel contains nickel, which is a well-documented irritant. Many of your clients will have allergic reactions to nickel. One benefit of using implant-certified material is a passive layer of chromium oxide that allows virtually no nickel to contaminate the wearer. Titanium, known as Ti, is an extremely inert and lightweight element. It can be anodized to create jewelry with different colors. These colors are created by producing an oxide layer. The thickness of the layer will reflect light differently, giving different colors. This does not affect the biocompatibility of the metal. Now, the colors may fade with time and certain types of chemical exposure, but this does not affect the safety of the jewelry. Gold has been used successfully as a piercing jewelry for thousands of years. It is considered by both our industry and the medical field to be biocompatible for most people when it's pure enough. Gold jewelry usually contains a mixture of gold and other metals, creating an alloy. Now, jewelry manufacturers use different alloy mixtures and often guard those recipes as trade secrets. The purest form of gold, 24 karat, contains no other materials, but it's too soft for the use in most body jewelry. Soft jewelry may get scratched, nicked, or burred easily. It can be difficult to thread without stripping, and jewelry under 14 karat should not be used as it contains less than 57% gold and can include amounts of other metals that may cause adverse reactions. Only solid white or yellow gold in 14 karat to 18 karat is suitable for insertion into the body in a fresh piercing when allowed with other inert elements. Colored versions such as rose gold or green gold are allied with copper, silver, and other metals. These alloys are more likely to cause adverse reactions in the body. In the making of white gold alloys, Metals such as platinum or palladium are used to make the gold white in appearance. Platinum is a very heavy and expensive precious metal. It is extremely inert and therefore an excellent choice for body jewelry. It is brilliant white in color and harder to work than any other precious metal. The availability of it in body jewelry is limited because of its greater cost and difficulty in manufacturing due to its high melting point. Niobium is very similar to titanium but denser. It's used extensively in the medical industry for implant components and has been the subject of thorough biocompatibility testing. Like titanium, niobium can be anodized to produce different colors. Unlike titanium, it can also be turned black using a heat treatment. Matte black niobium has a rough finish and is not suitable for fresh piercings. After being turned black, niobium can be polished to give it a smooth and glossy finish, which is acceptable for the use in initial piercings. Now, glass is made of fused quartz, lead-free soda lime, and lead-free products that are acceptable for initial piercing. These materials are autoclaved and very biocompatible. Glass can be made in different ways, but regardless of the other components, glass must be free of lead and other harmful substances to be used in piercings. Polymers, which are plastics. Medical tubing. Since tubing has a hollow center, male balls can be threaded into it, creating barbell-style jewelry that can be cut into custom lengths. Threadless pressure-fit balls can also be used with this type of jewelry. PTFE, polyterafluoroethylene, that is ASTM F754 compliant, may be used for fresh piercings. This inert plastic comes in solid rod, sheet, and tube. It's quite useful in situations where metal jewelry cannot or should not be worn. It is hydrophobic and has a low coefficient of friction. It's an interesting fact that the material is the only known substance in which a gecko cannot stick to. The thing with the PTFE is it's good for clients who need to maybe go in for tests or things like that in the medical world. If they have to go in for different tests where metal may be a problem, then we can use that PTFE as a way to hold the piercing in place and still not affect the mechanics or the heat of the tests. I guess the point is there's lots of things that you can use, but you need to do your research and ensure that the materials that you are using meet the specifications. It is why when you purchase jewelry for your studio, you must keep your receipts so that you can prove that you are in compliance. All right, jewelry to avoid. Conventional jewelry. Jewelry designed specifically for earlobe piercings is rarely appropriate for use in body piercings. The materials are seldom implant quality, and the styles may involve sharp edges or areas that can trap excreted body fluids and bacteria. And so those are the things like the butterfly closures that are commonly found on ear studs. Now, a lot of that jewelry it's fun jewelry, but it's jewelry that should only be used after a piercing has been well healed. Gold-filled, rolled, or plated jewelry, that type of jewelry is never acceptable for body piercings. These products are made by placing a thin layer of gold over either inferior metal, nickel or aluminum, or over a steel piece, first covered by an underplating of nickel or copper. Now, all of those things wear off and they can leave sharp edges and expose the poor quality of the metals that are underneath. Silver is unsuitable. It's a metal that oxidizes and tarnishes. It is not biocompatible. Many people will use silver or sterling silver in their body jewelry, but it can turn black in the skin and it can cause permanent discoloration. Many people find that even if they can wear silver comfortably in an ear piercing, other areas of the body are more sensitive and are quickly irritated. So sterling silver is not appropriate for body piercings and certainly not for an initial piercing. Other specifications of stainless steel, high carbon steel, and steel of the 302, 306, and 400 series are inappropriate for piercing jewelry. Many of these specifications of steel will break down or corrode when in continuous contact with body fluids. Always request your mill certificates directly from the manufacturer. They are required by law to provide these documents detailing the composition of the metal. Aluminum resembles niobium in appearance, and it's similar to titanium in weight. However, never appropriate for body jewelry. Long-term aluminum exposure has been connected to neurological damage, Alzheimer's disease, and metal sensitivities. Okay, so in just a few days we will be in the studio. I hope you are getting excited for the experience. There are some things you need to be aware of. In the studio, you are expected to always act professionally, dress appropriately, speak with respect, and pay attention. When we have guests in the studio, all students must not engage the client in conversation unless the client asks you a direct question. Otherwise, it is your job to watch, listen, and pay attention. There are many reasons I would like you to keep quiet. First, you'll have the opportunity to see how I talk to a client. Everything I say to them has purpose. Second, it will keep the flow of our clients moving through and allow us the opportunity to do more piercings, getting them in and out as quickly as possible. Please arrive a few minutes early for the training, as we start promptly and end on time. There is plenty of parking. Do not take the reserved spots. We are on the second floor, and the elevators are sometimes full in the early weekday mornings, as we are in a medical professional building. Do not use the stairs. You will get locked out of the building if you take the stairs. It's a good time to line up models for your hands-on work if you can. I encourage you to use social media to help promote models. Models pay $10 per piercing plus the price of the jewelry, and all piercings are completely supervised by me with the student doing the procedure. You will have plenty of hands-on practice prior to working on your models with practice boards and practice skins. We like to schedule the models for the second and third day of your training. We encourage you, the student, to participate as models at no charge for the piercing and pay only the cost of the jewelry. Enlist your friends and family to be models. All right, how we speak in the studio is very important. Words have meaning. Your income depends on them. The best body piercing success tip I can give you is to learn how to talk at the front counter and in the piercing room. In body piercing, words have important meaning, and those meanings can make your business or break your business. What you say and how you say it is just as important as the piercing skills you possess. There are very few absolutes in the body piercing business. That is why I use the word generally often. For instance, if you are suggesting a type of aftercare for healing a piercing, your client may not agree with you and have experience using other products or no products. There are many ways to do everything, so the use of the word generally is often a good choice. Avoid arguments at all cost. As a piercer, you will never win an argument, or at least it will not help you pay your bills. Learning to ask questions is often a good way to avoid an argument and still allow you to help the client make good decisions. The words you choose, what you say, and how you say it has a direct impact on your client's experience. Everything you say must be comforting to the client. That means that there are words we never use. The words you use project security, safety, confidence, experience, and skill to every one of your clients. Your selection of words will either create fear in your clients or comfort them by making the piercing experience a happy one. Your piercing client may be frightened and apprehensive from the moment they walk into your door. If not then, at least by the time they make the walk back into your piercing room. Never use these words with your clients. Everything you say and do must be comforting to the piercing client. That means that these words are not used. This takes some training and some discipline on your part, but you will thank yourself if you delete these words from your vocabulary. Those words are hurt, pain, oops, bleeding, recommended. When the client asks you, does it hurt? Your answer is, you will feel pressure, a bit of a pinch. That's about all. If they persist, just say it's a pressure piercings. It's a bit like pinching yourself and letting go. If you, the piercer, do the piercing right, that is what they will feel. When doing your piercing, the clamp or receiving tube pressure along with a steady and quick speed helps reduce the discomfort. We use the word discomfort. So your conversation could go something like this. Sure, you can experience some discomfort. Most people experience pressure. That's about all the sensation you will have. Or you could say, if you experience any discomfort at all, it will be just a little pressure and it's over very quickly. It is difficult to eliminate the word feel from your vocabulary. Try to substitute the word experience for feel as often as you can. Experience is something a lot more exciting than to feel something. Experiencing a thing has a fun connotation, while a feeling has a dual meaning. It could be good, but it generally means bad. I feel bad today. Okay. But I'm experiencing an exciting moment. Okay? Just a small item to keep in the back of your brain. It is never a good idea to use the word oops during a piercing. That tells your client something is wrong, not a good thing in a piercing room. Train yourself not to react to what's going on with the piercing. Your conversation during the piercing, if any, should be comforting and reassuring to your client. Do not ask your client how they feel. It's better to ask them if they are okay. Keep it short. Look at them, smile, and you just say, "You okay?" It's your job as a piercer to observe the client and pay attention to any signs of distress. This is especially true just after the piercing when the client is most likely to get lightheaded and faint. Try not to use the word bleeding in the piercing room. If your client asks you if they're bleeding, and they are, just say, "You're oozing a little. It's going to stop." One problem you will have is a friend or a relative in the piercing room blurting out, "You are bleeding." In that case, you say, "He or she is doing just fine." Minimize to the best of your ability what the others say in your piercing room. Always offer comforting statements to your piercing client. If you do, you will be surprised how many times they will tell you it didn't really hurt at all. On the other hand, do not over-comfort your piercing client. If you do, they will stay and stay and stay, and you'll never get rid of them. The more you enable them to act hurt, the more they will do it. Don't be an enabler. Be strong, positive comforter, and encourage your client to get up and get on their way. Understanding your body piercing client, how they react in the piercing room, is very important. Now, doctors recommend, piercers suggest. If you want to get into trouble, recommend something, anything in the piercing business. Do not recommend anything. When piercing, take that word out of your vocabulary forever. You can suggest. When you're talking about jewelry or anything about a body piercing, you only make suggestions. You suggest jewelry size. You suggest aftercare products. You should suggest problems, assessing solutions. You suggest products or aftercare. You can get into real trouble by recommending anything. This is a liability issue. If you suggest, it's unlikely you could be held liable. If you recommend, you are inviting legal liability. So, if you offer aftercare products for sale, always suggest their use and have that in your aftercare handouts. I suggest you use the protocol published by the APP as your aftercare guideline. All right, so how do you ask good questions to solve problems? When you have a client who has a problem with a piercing, take a moment to ask questions to uncover the real problem. The rule you must always follow is, when you ask a question, immediately shut up and listen carefully to the answer. If you ask at least 3 probing questions of your client, they will generally tell you exactly what they are doing to create the problem with the piercing. However, if you do not listen carefully, you will miss what they are saying. Many people simply do not listen carefully after asking a question. They are so eager to rebut what the other person is saying, they totally ignore what their client is actually saying. This is where miscommunication happens, creating frustration in you and your client. You may find some questions very simple, some redundant, and some way out there. We ask questions many different ways to get the right answers. Think of yourself as a Sherlock Holmes as you attempt to detect problems with your client's piercings. If you're doing the talking, you are losing the battle. Here are the questions to ask when confronted with a piercing problem. How old is the piercing? When did it start acting up? What was it doing when you first noticed the change in the piercing? Who did the piercing? Was it your shop or someone else? How are you taking care of it? What type of aftercare are they using, if any? What have you been putting on the piercing to help it heal? Have you put another person's jewelry in your piercing? Did you change your jewelry? How did you sterilize the jewelry before you put it in? Do you have your original jewelry you were pierced with in the piercing? Has the piercing been ripped or torn? Eyebrow piercings particularly migrate out of the piercing if it's torn or ripped even just slightly. Do you sleep on the piercing? Is the piercing redder in the morning than it is in the evening? If so, that may mean that they are sleeping on it and it's causing irritation. Do you belt over the piercing, over your navel, a tool belt, gun belts, anything that's hanging over that piercing, putting friction or pressure on it? Do you sit on your job most of the day? Do you rub your stomach on display counter at your work? Do you lift boxes at work? Women often rest boxes they lift on their stomachs, and that can irritate a navel piercing. Lifting and carrying children can also irritate a navel piercing. How often do they clean each day? Cleaning too much can be as harmful as not cleaning enough. So let's recap to make sure you're clear on the technique of asking a probing question. Asking probing questions will help you discover how you can help your clients. Ask the question in a non-judgmental manner. Don't act superior. Your client will quit responding to your efforts if you act like you're talking down to them. A very simple technique that works every time is to always listen without interruption after you ask the question. Another small technique that works every time is do not verbally respond immediately after your client has responded. This will make them feel like they should keep talking. This is when you often get the real answer. An awkward silence makes your client feel they should keep talking, and you very often get an honest admission. Just look at them nodding your head in an approving manner and say, "What else? Is that all? Okay. Anything more? Well, that's interesting. What else is happening?" You get the idea. Just look at your client, ask a leading question, and then sit back and listen without interruption. The more they talk, the easier it is for you to help them. This form of conversation also works if a client has a complaint about something else, and they just need to talk and be heard. All right. Now, once you've uncovered the problem, then you might be ready to work on solving the problem. We do this by asking non-threatening questions also. So questions you might ask are, generally, we do this. Is that okay with you? Generally, we find this. Does that apply to you? A lot of people will do this. Do you like that idea? Many of our clients find this. Is that all right with you? This jewelry would fit better if. Wouldn't you agree? Your piercing might heal quicker if. Don't you agree? It might be better to place the piercing here, don't you think? If you did, you might get better results. If we use this jewelry, it will look better. Wouldn't you agree? Can you see how this would fit better? Doesn't it make sense? Wouldn't you like it better if? Don't you feel better about? Don't you think your jewelry would look better if? You get the idea, right? Asking non-threatening questions that affirm the direction we would like them to go. All right, let's talk about ethics and legalities a little bit. We're going to talk about boundaries, determining the appropriateness of a piercing, piercing placement techniques, off-site piercing, paperwork documentation, minors, and drugs and alcohol. So boundaries. The piercer may wish to consider not only his or her own personal boundaries, but also their obligation to ensure a studio atmosphere that is respectful of all clients and staff. Many businesses refuse to serve clients who repeatedly make racist, sexual, homophobic, or otherwise offensive comments, or who behave rudely towards other clients or shop personnel. Posting a statement to this effect may help minimize your liability for discrimination, as well as advertise that your intentions are to those waiting. For example, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who is drunk, disorderly, or disrespectful. Or we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone at any time. So clients who are aggressive or unruly in the waiting room often get worse as they become more nervous and may need to return at a later date when they are better able to control themselves. It is also important to remember that the shop staff sets and maintains the behavior standards for the studio. The content and style of the staff interaction, apparel and personal habits, studio design, the decorations, your website, your music, your shop policies, all reflect on the level of your professionalism. Clients use this information to judge both what to expect from you and what you expect of them. In localities where shop personnel are extremely visible or well known, these exceptions may extend during off-work hours outside the studio. You may want to consider how you want to be perceived by clients who meet or observe you when you're not at work. The piercing room must remain under your control at all times. You, the piercer, are responsible for the health and safety of everyone in the studio and must set personal and business policy accordingly. While it may be helpful for a client to have a friend in the piercing room for moral support, many piercers limit the number of observers to 1 or 2 and dictate where they should stand or sit and how they should behave. Many piercers do not allow small children or others who either cannot or will not behave appropriately in the piercing room. In forming your policy, keep in mind that piercing is a technical and hygienic procedure and can also be personally meaningful experience. Try to find a way that respects both the integrity of your technique and the needs of your client. If you do allow guests in the piercing room, be aware they can become lightheaded during a piercing. A well-placed chair can keep them out of your setup area and minimize the fainting mishaps. Do not pierce a client under any of these following circumstances. Now, our APP literature outlines a client's rights with regard to the piercing services, but a piercer also has a right to expect appropriate behavior from his clients. Sometimes it's inappropriate to perform even the most standard piercing. A piercer should politely refuse to perform any piercing that could be dangerous, ill-suited, unsuccessful, or for which they are not trained. The following examples are reasons a piercer may decline to perform a particular piercing: reschedule, abort a piercing procedure, or dismiss a client from the studio permanently. The client appears intoxicated, behaves erratically, or is not in full possession of his or her mental or physical faculties. In cases where the piercer can tactfully request a conversation with the client's doctor, psychiatrist, or caregiver if they're under medications that may cause those kinds of conditions. Now, if a client maintains poor personal hygiene, that could compromise the well-being of the piercing, and that affects the ability of the piercer to perform the procedure. A client makes comments or gestures of a sexual or otherwise inappropriate or offensive manner. There is an obvious skin or tissue abnormality that may include rashes, lumps, bumps, scars, lesions, swelling, fluid tenderness, moles, freckles, abrasions, or any other abnormality. A client who wants to pierce irregular or surgically altered anatomy, or that is unsuited due to an occupational, recreational, or environmental factors. The client that has impending plans to become pregnant. It's advisable to refrain from piercing during pregnancy, allow the body to focus on the important, complex, and demanding tasks that it's already handling. The client requests a piercing that is frequently unsuccessful, commonly rejected in the body, particularly when the individual is uneducated or unwilling to accept responsibility for the risks involved. A client that has a heart murmur, diabetes, hemophilia, autoimmune disorders, or other medical condition that may negatively influence the piercing procedure or the healing process, or they require medications before dental or other procedures. In these cases, the client must consult a physician prior to any piercing and bring in a signed physician's acknowledgement form stating that the physician suggests that the piercing would be fine. Now, techniques vary from piercer to piercer. Some are going to utilize tools such as forceps, needle receiving tubes, while others use special hand positioning that allows for freehand piercing. Most combine their knowledge of various techniques with the use of tools and hand placements in a way that works best for them in each individual piercing situation. The most fundamental aspects for the evolution of a piercer's personal style are proper training, continuing education, and ongoing search for knowledge and information. While it is important to observe other piercers and learn throughout your career, new procedures and techniques should not be undertaken merely for the sake of innovation. To ensure client and piercer's safety, piercers should be thoroughly trained and well skilled in the basic procedures before attempting more difficult methods. When trying new techniques or experimenting with new styles, it is essential to research all aspects of the procedures, understanding multiple options about differences in the client's comfort, sterility, the efficiency and the ease of healing, the jewelry type, the placement, the risk, the benefits, all of that. All piercing placements, old or new, should be decided by if it's anatomically suitable and for the overall safety. Piercing placements that are new should not be invented for the sake of novelty. It is neither safe nor professional to use paying customers to test techniques or placement theories. Experimental piercings should not be introduced to the paying public, to social media, or the press until they have proven to be successful and safe for a sufficient percentage of individuals over a reasonable period of time. Piercing liability insurance provides many Piercing liability insurance providers may refuse to cover experimental piercing placements, and local regulations may prohibit certain variations. For more information, contact your insurance provider and/or your health department. Paperwork and business documentation. Release forms, consent forms. Professional piercers should obtain and keep on file a signed release for every service performed within the studio, including piercing, stretching, and jewelry insertion. This should be done regardless of whether or not it is required by law or an insurance provider. The consent form should state that the client requests the piercing, indicating that you did not pierce him or her without consent, and you informed the client about how to properly care for the piercing. While such forms do not prevent legal action, they do provide evidence that you have made an effort to educate your client and to operate your business legitimately. The release form should also contain the following information: a record of the ID type and number with a date of birth, a valid photo identification, often a state-issued driver's license ID, a passport, military ID card, or other government-issued ID. Your policy in your studios is to photocopy the identification on the release form, then do so. Acknowledgement that the client has not consumed alcoholic beverages or other intoxicants in the last 24 hours. Information on recent intake of any medical medication such as blood thinners, aspirin, ibuprofen, or other. Disclosure of whether the client is under the care of a physician for any condition that might affect the procedure or healing process. Diabetes, hemophilia, or other medical condition that may affect the piercing procedure or healing. If this inquiry is allowed by law, in most cases it is. Acknowledgement of having eaten within the last 4 hours, Note that some studios have shorter time requirement. Clients should eat a healthy meal before being pierced to minimize the likelihood of dizziness, nausea, and/or fading. Refined sugars such as soda or sweets can increase the risk of a low blood sugar reaction. Any other information that is required by your state and local authorities or your insurance provider, and the signature of the client must be on the end of the form. For minors, for any piercing of a minor, a parent or legal guardian must be present to sign the consent form. State-issued photo identification is required from the legal guardian and the identification of the minor. Now, this can be whatever a photo ID. So, driver's license, a state-issued photo ID, a school yearbook, and maybe a birth certificate. Those types of things that can prove that the person that you are piercing is the one that the legal guardian is in charge of. In the event the parent has a different last name or address from the child, documentation is needed to prove the relationship. For example, divorce or marriage certificate, custodial or adoption papers, birth certificate. A unique single exception would be an emancipated and/or married minor who presents positive proof of their legal emancipation and/or marriage. In certain states, such minors are considered adults for legal and practical purposes. Check your local legislation regarding the emancipated married minors. Don't allow yourself to be lulled into the trap of accepting a minor without the appropriate ID and permission. Ask yourself this one question: is this client worth your losing the ability to practice as a professional piercer? I guarantee you the answer is always no. Emergencies. We must always be prepared for any emergency. Needle sticks and sharps accidents require strict adherence to procedures. Bleeding and fading are all common in the piercing room, and you must be prepared for special circumstances. Let's talk about ways we can be prepared and aware. All piercing premises should have at least one first aid kit that is well stocked, familiar, and available to all staff. It should be used for emergencies only. Some emergencies in the piercing studio can be avoided by being prepared. The piercing release form provides relevant information about the health of the client and can alert the piercer to potential problems before they happen. Responding quickly and appropriately is important when the customer faints or a diabetic suffers an insulin reaction. Knowing beforehand that a particular client is prone to such occurrences will help you plan ahead. Additionally, a jar of candy, cold water bottles, or ice packs and smelling salts can be helpful. Needle sticks or sharps accidents. One of the risks faced by a professional piercer is the possibility of an accidental exposure to blood or other potentially infectious materials. This can happen by a needle stick with a contaminated sharps or a piercing needle, or exposure through splashing, spraying, or other contact with contaminated material, objects, or surfaces. If your skin is broken by other contaminated items such as a used insertion tape or a toothpick, a wire connecting snip, this is also a sharps accident. However, a puncture sustained from an unused sterile needle does not require the following of the needle stick protocols that are outlined below. So every action in a piercing procedure should be deliberate and done with the intention of minimizing the risk of a sharps accident. Professional piercers should be focused, alert, and in control of the environment to help avoid the possibility of such an event, to reduce the likelihood of a needle stick incident. Know the location of needles and other sharp objects at all times. Once used, never set down or lose sight of the needle, especially the tip. Dispose of used needles in the appropriate approved sharps container immediately after the procedure or as soon as possible. Don't clutter your tray. Dispose of any used gauze, paper products, and packing before piercing and as soon as possible during the procedure. Don't rush when using, handling, or disposing of needles. Focus on your actions. Be consistent with your tray setup. If you are using needles and insertion tapers on the same procedure, keep them separate and know where each tool is located at all times. Remain in control and do not pierce clients who are overly nervous or unprepared for the procedure. Do not pierce if you are ill, tired, or have not eaten for a prolonged period of time. Be at your best, awake and aware. Your clients deserve nothing less. Your own health is potentially at stake. Examine all equipment such as tools, gloves, corks or synthetic stoppers and rubber bands. Flaws and failure of these to perform as intended can lead to needle sticks. If there is any possibility that an unused needle has become contaminated, it must be immediately disposed of in the sharps container. If the used needle is corked, do not remove the cork before disposal unless it is unavoidable. If corking after the use is necessary, federal regulations require this to be done one-handed, holding the needle, not the cork, or by using mechanical implements such as hemostats or forceps. Always replace the sharps container as soon as contents reach the full line, and never remove anything from a sharps container. To reduce the likelihood of other exposure incidents, use caution if you must reach into a contaminated instrument tray. Items should be removed mechanically or by the procedure outlined in your studio's exposure control plan. Use caution when handling contaminated sharps, such as scissors or insertion tapers. When scrubbing tools manually, they should be completely submerged under water to minimize splashing and spraying. If contaminated tools are soaked in a disinfecting solution, this must be done in the biohazard sterilization room as opposed to a piercing room. This will prevent spills and splashes that could occur when transporting the soaking container from one room to another, unless a tray with a sealable lid is used. The ultrasonic unit must have a built-in drainage system. Using one without a drain is dangerous and not appropriate for processing contaminated items in a body piercing studio. In needle stick. If, despite all precautions, a sharps injury occurs, secure the needle to prevent additional sticks. If necessary, call a coworker to finish the procedure. Wash the area for several minutes with antimicrobial liquid soap. Rinse and bandage the wound. Remain calm. Take some time to calm down. You may or may not feel that it is appropriate to ask about a client's health status, particularly regarding hepatitis and HIV. In some states, it is illegal to inquire, so you may be treading on dangerous legal ground by asking someone to disclose their status regarding HIV and other communicable diseases. You may ask a client to be tested, but they do have the right to refuse. Immediately follow your studio's exposure control plan. These are established with your health and safety in mind. You should seek immediate medical attention, especially if your client has disclosed that they are HIV positives or you have good reasons to suspect that they may be. It is important to know that there is an HIV prophylaxis available that could prevent HIV infection, but this must be done within the first 24 to 48 hours. While this treatment can have severe side effects, it is an important option for those who have been exposed to HIV or the blood of somebody who is at high risk for an HIV infection. If you have not already been vaccinated for the Hep B, you may want to consult a medical professional to determine if a series of post-exposure injections is appropriate. Blood testing done shortly after a needle stick injury is suggested, although immediate testing will not indicate if the disease was transmitted through the needle stick injury. It will provide a baseline to compare with future testing. If you are unsure whether you want to have your blood immediately tested, it is important to know that your blood can be drawn and saved for later testing. Mentally review the incident. Think about the events leading up to the exposure and what could be done differently in the future. Learn from your mistake and take additional precautions when a similar situation is in the future. A policy and procedure change may be needed. File your OSHA occupational post-exposure report before returning to the procedure room if you have a coworker standing in for you. When it comes to bleeding, most piercings do not bleed much, if at all, but the possibility always exists. It's a good practice to remind clients that any break in the skin can bleed, bruise, and/or swell, and that piercings are no exception. If the client is made aware of it in advance, that these possibilities exist, they are much less likely to be concerned or anxious if it should happen. A client who has recently ingested alcohol, aspirin, caffeine, certain herbs, supplements, or prescription drugs is more likely to bleed, sometimes profusely. Inform clients to avoid blood-thinning agents if at all possible. Piercers should prepare themselves and their client for the possibility of additional bleeding when a piercing has these agents in his or her system. Some piercings, such as a Prince Albert and eyebrows, are located in more vascular areas, so they are more apt to bleed. Using a needle of a larger gauge than the jewelry may result in excessive bleeding in any type of piercing. To minimize bleeding and client discomfort, use a larger needle only when necessary. Removing jewelry from a fresh piercing may produce copious bleeding. In an emergency, it may be best not to remove the jewelry and let the medical professional handle the situation. Have sterile gauze pads and/or swabs ready anytime bleeding may occur. To stop bleeding, apply firm and continuous pressure for up to 15 minutes. Dispose of all used gauze pads containing blood in the biohazard waste. A small disposable cold pack can be applied to help minimize swelling and bleeding from facial or body piercings. For a tongue or oral facial piercing, have the client gently suck on small cubes, ice chips, or shaved ice. The amount of blood may seem greater when mixed with the saliva. Septic pencils and similar products are not appropriate for use on puncture wounds such as piercing. It is unprofessional to release a client with an actively bleeding piercing. Be sure that the bleeding has essentially ceased and that the area is reasonably clean before the client leaves. It is illegal for a piercer to stitch or attach tissue. If a client is bleeding profusely, particularly from an oral surface-to-surface or genital piercing, excluding the normal bleeding of a Prince Albert, apodivia, or triangle piercing, and you cannot stop it within 15 minutes of continuous firm pressure, you have an emergency bleeding situation. Piercers are not to treat emergency bleeding. The client should be brought to the emergency room or an ambulance called immediately. Another example of emergency bleeding is a significant bleeding that persists several days after the piercing, excluding the normal piercing of the aforementioned genital piercings. So use only your appropriate size needles, apply pressure, and never let a client leave the shop until the bleeding has stopped. Fainting. Fainting is more common in piercing studios than many people realize. A common misconception is that low blood sugar levels are the only cause of people losing consciousness and passing out. However, fainting is frequently caused by loss of blood flow to the brain. Most often, this is a response caused by a drop in blood pressure and heart. The occurrence of fainting is more likely if the client has consumed excessive caffeine or certain prescription drugs, has not slept well, has high anxiety levels, or has not eaten a meal within 4 hours and the stomach is empty. Problems are also more likely if the weather is very hot or humid, or the individual stands up too soon after being pierced. Any combination of the above factors can increase the incidence of problems. A client may become lightheaded or faint at any time. It could happen while browsing at the jewelry counter, filling out paperwork, being marked for the placement, during the actual piercing, or several minutes after it is done. Be aware that a piercer's companion may also faint. Keep a watch on all the people who come into your studio and maintain control of the environment so that a fainting person will not surprise you. Observant studio personnel and piercers can often spot a person who is having trouble. Frequently, these symptoms will include complaints of a headache or blurry vision, complexion which turns pale or waxy, white or blue lips, crying, nausea, trembling, the inability to concentrate, irritability or confusion, excessive perspiration, drowsiness, dizziness, or lack of coordination. I have seen almost all of these happen in my years as a piercer at one point or another. So fainting, what do you do? Whether it's the client or an onlooker who faints, the course of action should be the same. If the person is not in a lying down position with their feet elevated above their heart, place them in that posture. Or if they are seated, bend them forward so the head is between the knees. Continue to talk to them, reassure them, and offer cool water to drink. Candy, juice, and or glucose tablets may be helpful for some clients. Turning off or dimming the lights in the room. A cold compress on the forehead, wrists, and or back of the neck may help. A loss of consciousness can sometimes be prevented with these measures. If the client does not pass out, do not give them any sort of if the client does pass out, do not give them any sort of inhalant such as ammonia. These are considered a last resort. They are used only if the person remains unconscious for more than 2 minutes, which is very rare. When someone has fainted, call emergency services immediately if the person is not breathing, fails to regain consciousness after 2 minutes, fell from a height or is injured and bleeding from the fall, is known to have diabetes, is pregnant or is over 50 years old, feels chest pain, pressure or discomfort, or has a pounding or irregular heartbeat, can't speak or has difficulty speaking, can't move or feel a limb, has numbness and tingling, blurred vision, or feels confused for an extended period of time. These are all symptoms of a possible stroke. If someone has convulsions, tongue trauma, or loss of bowel control, do not attempt to put anything in their mouth. Move away any object that could cause injury to the person. If vomiting occurs, turn the individual's head to the side to avoid choking. Some shaking or twitching is not unusual with fainting. Most often, the person will come to within a few seconds. However, even a couple of seconds can seem extraordinarily long in these circumstances, so it is important that you remain calm and aware. It is possible that they can still hear you, although they may be unable to respond. Attempt to achieve communication by saying their name calmly and not too loudly. People often experience confusion when regaining consciousness and may or may not know where they are, who they are, or what has taken place. So explain what has happened. Do not let them jump up quickly and leave the building. People are sometimes embarrassed that they have fainted and therefore want to leave immediately. Although this is a very common reaction, it is ill-advised. Have the person rest quietly for a few minutes. As they begin to feel better, first have them sit up for several minutes. A short while later, you may allow them to stand up. If at any point they begin to feel unstable or unwell, have them lie down again. Stay with the person as long as necessary and call for assistance from a coworker if needed. If this should happen during a piercing, first secure the needle. It may be acceptable to attend to the piercing and finish the jewelry insertion later. If the presence of the needle may endanger you or the client, as with a tongue or lip piercing, immediately remove the needle and deal with the situation at hand. You will have ample time for questions during our hands-on days, and I encourage you to write down questions that you may have as you continue your reading and your learning. Feel free to text, email, or call me. Your APP materials and book are excellent sources of information. YouTube videos, social media posts may or not be good source of information about piercing. I hope you're excited, and we'll see you in the hands-on portion very soon.